Welcome back to Biographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and today we're talking about Michael Jackson, the king of pop, with a script provided by Justin Crockett. And real quick, before we get started with this, comment your favorite Michael Jackson song and whether you can still enjoy it, considering certain things that have come to light. Moving on. There are few faces in the history of the world that are as recognizable as the late king of pop, Michael Jackson. You can put him on the level of Mickey Mouse, Michael Jordan, Marilyn Monroe, and a host of other M-named celebrities, as people who have crossed over from being simply famous to a level of immortality that is staggering. If you did not live through the 1980s, you cannot imagine the amount of fame this man possessed, most memorably after doing his signature moonwalk dance at an award show in 1983. His music videos took on a level of craftsmanship that married together beautifully with the rise of MTV, a channel devoted to just those kinds of clips, and Beavis and Butthead. He was a child star, a philanthropist, an unrivaled entertainer, and also one of the most tortured and problematic stars the world has ever seen. He began as a young boy, dancing on stage and singing with his brothers, creating funk and soul hits into his early adulthood, taking the world over in his 20s, and then spending most of his later adult life combating the demons he tried to hide from the world for so long. He tried to drastically change his looks. He went through physical and emotional abuse from his family, and he was accused several times of misconduct with young boys. To put it bluntly, Michael Jackson was a peerless icon in the music world, and also one of the weirdest human beings to breakdance the planet. Here, we tell the story of the troubled boy king who never really grew up. Michael Joseph Jackson was born August 29, 1958, in the working-class city of Gary, Indiana. Funnily enough, he lived on Jackson Street. He was one of 10 children born to Joseph and Catherine Jackson. Dad was a construction man and played guitar with a local band on the side. His mother was a Jehovah's Witness and played a few instruments of her own when she wasn't working shifts at a department store. He started up a little group with a few of his boys, Jackie, Tito, and Jermaine. Young Michael, only 6 at the time, helped out with backup instruments, but it was very clear he had vocal and frontman talents that would soon eclipse everyone else, including his father. And maybe that's why his father began to berate Michael. He regularly beat the young boy and said he had a fat nose. He would closely monitor the rehearsals for the young group of kids, hitting them with a belt if they missed a note or a dance move. Their practices would last up to 5 hours at times. Michael started to develop little tics from Joe's verbal barbs, and would even try to cover up his nose well into adult life. Michael's mother, Catherine, may not have physically struck Michael and the kids, but she surely added some mental trauma of her own, obsessively cleaning their skin with rubbing alcohol because of germ fears, and slathering Vaseline on them to make them more glowy, whatever that means. It likely cannot be overstated how the atmosphere that Joe created around his children contributed to Michael's later life and bizarre behavior. It may have also created a musical genius and pop legend. So isn't that just a sad thing to ponder? The group would eventually morph into the Jackson 5 that you know and love. Michael would begin to take on more of the frontman role and would develop a knack for perfectionism that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He began to tour with his brothers at the tender age of 8, rambling across the Midwest United States in the famous Chitlin Circuit, which is where many black entertainers had to perform due to the still prevalent chokehold of racial segregation in the country. By 1967, the Jackson 5's powers were strong enough that they won an amateur concert at the world-famous Apollo Theater in New York City. This attracted the attention of the legendary Motown record company as well as the interest of Diana Ross, who fronted the girl group The Supremes. The last 3 years of the 1960s saw the group begin to become more confident on stage, which led to more television appearances and, in 1970, their first major hit single, I Want You Back. They starred on the same TV shows that launched the Beatles into the stratosphere years earlier, like The Ed Sullivan Show. They had iconic dances that accompanied their ever-increasing stable of hits like ABC, I'll Be There, and The Love You Save. Michael began to be singled out as the star of the group, and girls got to see his face on teen magazine covers the world over. The Jackson 5 had achieved the kind of crossover success that black artists had previously only dreamed of. It was Jackson Mania, and the band was selling out arenas worldwide. They even had their own cartoon show. To capitalize on this success, Motown Records started up a solo career for Michael in 1971. But this sheer amount of content and the fact that the boys put out 6 albums from 1970 to 1971 probably led to a bit of oversaturation. Michael was still reaching the hit charts here and there as a solo artist, most famously with Ben, a ballad about a rat, but the Jackson 5 as of 1972 were no longer the draw they used to be, which culminated in a break from their record company just a few years later. And it might sound weird coming from a white dude on a YouTube channel that mostly does biographies of, dead presidents, but a black artist leaving Motown Records was no small news. It was now 1976, and Michael Jackson was 18 years old and on his own. Even though Michael Jackson was seeing some of his own solo success in the mid-1970s, he still felt a sense of loyalty to his brothers, even after they left Motown Records. They thought long and hard and renamed themselves the Jacksons. They had a new recording contract with Epic, and with Michael as the lead songwriter, had a decent string of hits on their own, the biggest being 1978's Shake Your Body Down to the Ground. Michael used his friendship with singer Diana Ross to his benefit in 1977 as he starred alongside her in the film The Wiz, which was a take on The Wizard of Oz but with black actors and a funky soundtrack. While the film didn't exactly set the box office on fire, Michael's role as the Scarecrow showed off his burgeoning confidence and charisma. He had song and dance numbers in the film that demonstrated his clear talent, which helped The Wiz gain a cult following in later years. The producer of the music for the film, Quincy Jones, would soon become a major player in Michael's meteoric rise to solo stardom. But it was also during this time that one of the first incidents happened that would dictate Michael's life for years to come. He broke his nose on stage while dancing, which led to his first foray into plastic surgery. It would not be his first nor his most drastic, as this was mostly restorative work on his face. But theories abound that being teased about his nose as a child and not wanting to look anything like his terror of a father led to more desire to change how he looked. Nasal issues notwithstanding, Michael decided in 1979 that he was just going to take over the world, apparently. He put out the solo album Off the Wall, which was produced by his friend Quincy Jones. Michael was provided with top-shelf musical talent to provide the funky disco-era rhythms, and he was at the peak of his songwriting abilities. That marriage of producer and artist led to an immediate smash hit of an album. Songs like Rock With You and Don't Stop Till You Get Enough are still making hips bounce to this day. Eventually, Off the Wall would sell upward of 20 million copies, an echelon of success that Michael had never even conceived of before. It had 4 top 10 singles, featuring songwriting from a Beatle, garnered numerous American Music Awards and a Grammy, but being the perfectionist and trauma survivor Jackson was, he still felt the album should have made a bigger impact. So, the next year, he secured himself the highest compensation rate per album of any artist in history and began to work on the next album. Good Lord, would he bring the fire with this one? Michael Jackson took the stage on March 25, 1983, for a solo spot during the Motown 25 Yesterday, Today, Forever event as the opening drums from Billie Jean sounded. In about 4 minutes, he took over the world. The audience was rapturous as he sang his recent hit from his colossally popular Thriller album that had just been released the previous year. Television audiences wouldn't see this dominating performance for another 2 months, but when they did, 47 million people collectively lost their minds. After seeing Michael clad in a sequin jacket and single white glove first do his backward slippery-footed moonwalk along the stage, not only did he debut one of the most iconic songs and dance moves of the 20th century, but he also reunited with all of his Jackson brothers for the first time in several years as they did a medley of their hits. Oh, and that little Thriller album? That had only been clogging up the ears of the entire world since its release in November of 1982. Blockbuster hits like the aforementioned Billie Jean, Beat It, and the title track were accompanied by long-form music videos on MTV, the cable channel that saw its star rise in a way very similar to Michael's before it devolved into teen mom shenanigans. Thriller would have the distinction of being the best-selling album of all time, moving about 70 million units and making the rest of the decade completely obsessed with the man. There's a big reason why Michael's music was included in much of the Back to the Future trilogy's soundtracks. Hell, even in 2006, when my friends and I were still in high school, we'd mime the Thriller dance and hum the bass lines whenever it came on. It was just that famous. And most of us were hardcore metalheads too. I still am. 1984 was an especially notable year for Michael. At that year's Grammy Awards, he set a record with 8 wins, including Album of the Year. President Ronald Reagan also recognized MJ for his work in the community, especially with drug and alcohol-related charities and organizations. Pepsi-Cola came a-calling as well and made Michael and his brothers record-breaking spokesmen for their soft drink. This was the new generation era of Pepsi advertising, and Jackson's fingerprints were all over the campaign. It would almost instantly spell disaster. Early in 1984, while filming a simulated concert for a Pepsi commercial, pyrotechnics went off close enough to Michael that his head was badly burned. His dance moves might have saved him from further damage, as he did a spin move that was so quick that it almost put the flames out, while others ran over to assist him. He very soon after went in for more rounds of plastic surgery to hide the scarring, and to do more work on his nose, as he said he'd had trouble breathing since the first operation. This, of course, was the beginning of a more drastic change in appearance for Michael. Just a few months later, Michael and his brothers took to the road for the massively successful Victory Tour, the first reunion of the family in many years. It would be the last real tour that they would do, as unresolved past trauma just became too much, and Michael announced his split from the group at the tour's last stop. Early in 1985, his humanitarian efforts reached their peak, as he joined forces with his producer Quincy Jones and fellow pop star Lionel Richie to write a song for the famine happening in Africa called We Are the World. Michael and his songwriting team called in every favor to every music artist they knew, making the song a who's who of contemporary stars. It was around this time that the public began to have other emotions directed towards Michael other than unabashed idolization. Michael had worked recently with former Beatle Paul McCartney on some songs, during which time he got wind of how much money Paul made just from owning other artists' catalogs of songs. In a series of backdoor dealings, Michael actually bought the entire Beatles songbook out from under Paul in 1985, a shrewd move that began to sour some people on the world's biggest pop star. The mid-'80s were also a time when many of the biggest Michael Jackson rumors began to take hold. There were reports of him sleeping in a hyperbaric chamber to reduce the effects of aging, or him taking medications to make his voice higher. In 1986, the world got to meet his pet chimpanzee, Bubbles, and learned that Michael shared his bathroom with the Beast. Stories came out that he was trying to buy the bones of the legendary Elephant Man, whose severe deformities were a medical anomaly. Now, some of these reports did have little nuggets of truth. He did have an obsessive fascination with the Elephant Man. Others were pure gossip magazine fodder for the newly christened Wacko Jacko. But the public just didn't care. This stuff was just too juicy. This was also the time in his life where his skin was changing color at a rate as drastic as his face was changing shape, from seemingly constant surgical work. Diagnoses range from vitiligo, where skin loses its pigmentation over time, to a form of lupus, an autoimmune disease that can severely damage the skin. Lupus can also destroy cartilage, which constitutes a good deal of the nose. Michael Jackson still had a rabid fan base, make no mistake about that. In 1987, he followed up his previous blockbuster album with Bad. It spawned 5 #1 singles on the charts, a feat never previously accomplished, and was accompanied by a massive world tour that lasted until 1989. During this period is when he purchased his infamous Neverland Ranch home in California. He spent $17 million on the property and soon began to install such standard home features as a zoo, Ferris wheel, and movie theaters. Look, I can't blame him for that last one. When I was a kid, I saw someone with a legit home movie theater built into their second floor with like 100 seats or something, and have dreamed about that ever since. I don't think I'd ever build one, but it's nice to dream about stupid crap we don't need, right? As the decade ended and the 1990s took over, Michael began to craft another landmark album, pretty much his last that had a major impact. 1991's Dangerous. Stuffed with hits and accompanied by more cinematic music videos like Black or White and Remember the Time, it had some harder, more street-conscious rhythms, an attempt by Michael to keep a youthful audience. He pulled off a stunning performance at the Super Bowl in 1993. He started the Heal the World Foundation, where children stuck in poverty or war-torn areas were airlifted supplies or gifted medical benefits. Sometimes they were even brought to Michael's Neverland home to experience the childlike exhibits on display. Oh, great, here we go. Inviting children into Michael Jackson's home might have been innocent as an idea, but it quickly put a bad taste in people's mouths. These increasingly frequent actions coincided with an interview Michael gave with Oprah Winfrey in 1993. In that piece, he detailed his father's abuse when Jackson was a child, and his desperate attempts to connect with people and trying to reclaim his childhood. This may have put the public on Michael's side again, but the support was short-lived. Michael Jackson's first public allegations of sexual assault towards a young boy came in 1993, when a 13-year-old and his father alleged lewd acts by the King of Pop, leading to Michael being strip-searched and having police raid his Neverland house. And they found books of young boys in inappropriate stages of nudity that no grown man should have. While no charges were filed somehow, Michael did settle with the family for $23 million. Let me ask you a question. What's one way to sidestep a charge like this? If you answered, marry Elvis Presley's daughter, you hit the nail on the head. Because that's exactly what he did. Michael wed Lisa Marie Presley the next year after proposing over the telephone like Cupid himself would do. The public almost instantly sensed this as nothing more than a PR stunt. That marriage would last barely a year. Michael would try matrimony again in 1996 with Debbie Rowe, who worked at the clinic that treated his skin conditions and who would birth 2 children for him. These years were marred with controversy for Michael and not as much great art as he had produced in the past. He did another worldwide tour and put out His Story, which was part greatest hits and part new music. Michael was even wider, his nose even thinner, and his body gaunt from stress, overwork, and a painkiller addiction. His last real marks left on the music world took place in 2001, the first of which involved him and his brothers coming together for the 30th anniversary of Michael's solo career. The Jacksons took to the stage together for the first time since 1984 and did a greatest hits medley, before Michael did his own hits, bookended by a glut of famous musicians. The second was the release of what would be his final solo album, Invincible. It sold plenty, but did not make the impact his work usually made. The critics thought so as well. Rolling Stone remarked that several of the songs on the album were Jackson merely treading water. Not long after, there was just a slew of bad press for Michael. In 2002, he infamously dangled his child over a balcony in Germany. That same year, a damning documentary by Michael Bashir premiered, which showed actual footage of the questionable ways that Michael acted around young children. He admitted to sleepovers and holding hands with a 12-year-old, which then put him on the radar for another deep look from the authorities. At the end of 2003, he was formally charged with child and providing alcohol to minors. It would take 2 years before he would see a courtroom, and this time he was acquitted on all counts. Documents that were released later showed that prosecutors had no real evidence to use against him. In his final years of life, Michael Jackson more or less went into hiding. He teetered on the edge of bankruptcy and had to sell off many of his most prized possessions, including his catalog of Beatles songs and his Neverland house. He moved to Bahrain, and then Ireland, and then Las Vegas, ostensibly to evade the press and potentially the law. His rumored debt was over $500 million. But still, the music kept calling to him. He continued recording new music in the studio, but he was a performer at heart. Whether it was his natural inclination or a way to keep money coming in to offset his constant financial instability, he decided to make a grand statement, a way to make a true comeback to the stage, but also to potentially retire with grace. It would be called This Is It, a series of 10 concerts spanning the globe, his first live shows in 12 years. Demands for the concert was so high, Jackson increased the London set of shows to 50 dates. Worldwide, over 1 million tickets were sold in 2 hours. He moved to LA and began a strenuous stretch of training and rehearsal, something his already fragile body had trouble with. His mind raced with all this new activity. He planned new albums, museums, casinos, all sorts of ideas to bring the world's love back to him. Unfortunately, just a few weeks into rehearsals for his return to stage prominence, and less than a month before his first London show, he died from cardiac arrest. June 25, 2009 was the date that an overdose of propofol and benzodiazepine prescribed by his shady personal doctor made his iconic body stop moving for good. Word of Michael's death spread online like wildfire. Entire news websites crashed from the traffic. Channels like MTV, who hadn't done much in the way of playing the music videos they were known for, instead of, Teen Mom, dedicated the entire day to showing Michael's groundbreaking clips. Michael Jackson had the world laid to rest on a televised memorial, July 9, 2009, at the Staples Center in Los Angeles. 31 million people watched as every famous musician you could imagine played his songs, and people who shared parts of his life said words to his casket, which sat just off the stage. He was buried in California. His doctor was convicted of homicide for his reckless prescribing and sentenced to 4 years in prison. In separating the art from the artist, perhaps you'd find no harder example than Michael Jackson. His eccentricities and problematic behavior are undeniable, but so is the power of his music, made by a fantastical boy who never really grew up. I guess as a palate cleanser here, my favorite rumor regarding Michael Jackson surrounds the Sega Genesis game Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles. From what I understand, Michael actually provided a lot of melodies for the game's tunes before he left the project, and it's basically been proven that the team stole his music and put it into the main game. As a result, key songs for certain stages in Sonic 3 have been replaced in recent ports of the game, and the replacements suck. Wild, right? Well, I certainly hope you enjoyed that video, and if you did, be sure to do all that algorithmic jazz, and be sure to keep it tuned here to Biographics for more videos like this. And you can read more by Justin on his website, Business Handshakes, linked in the description. I'm Eric Malachite, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.